Hey everyone, how's it going? All right, so what do Pink Floyd's Roger Waters and his wife, Sting and his wife Trudy Steyer, Danny Glover, Mia Farrow, and Daryl Hannah, the actress, all have in common? Well, they were all part of trial lawyer Stephen Donziger's elaborate plot to extort originally $19 billion from Chevron, but it was reduced to $9 billion by the same Ecuador court that consisted of judges that he, in no small measure, threatened, bribed, and in the end basically intimidated, and then ghost wrote his own judgment to receive from them a ruling against Chevron that, had it stood, would have paid him originally $19 billion, or at least technically, as he said, about $5 billion of that total judgment. It was reduced to $9 billion. But thankfully, we have Joe Berlinger to really give a pat on the back. Now, Berlinger, excuse me, you would say, who's Joe Berlinger? Joe Berlinger is the producer of a movie called Crude. And Crude was essentially supposed to be this sort of like film-based love letter to Steve Donziger, praising him for being the champion attorney that goes in and represents the indigenous people of Ecuador who can't stand up for themselves against the big American baddie oil company that ostensibly was Chevron. Okay? That was what Crude was about. But see, these outtakes from the movie surfaced featuring Stephen Donziger explaining how basically the way to do business in Ecuador is through threats, bribery, and extortion. And that was the beginning of the end of Donziger's scheme, because it revealed a lot. Basically so much that now Donziger, as I make this vlog, is under virtual house arrest for his actions. In addition to really pissing off Judge Kaplan in the Northern District Court in New York. But I digress. Where this is right now is that Donziger was found to be in contempt of court for just the latest in a string of actions against the Northern District New York Judge Kaplan that in and of itself could make an excellent book. An excellent book. But the basic story is that since roughly 2005, actually 2000, if you want to go back to 1993, fine, Donziger has launched this effort to sue American oil companies, pointing at Chevron exclusively, for what he claimed was environmental damage done in Ecuador. The reality, the truth, is that from 1967 to 1992, an organization called TexPet, which was a combination of Texaco and Petro Ecuador, hence TexPet, right, produced oil in Ecuador. It was really Texaco showing Ecuador how to produce oil on its own. It was to the point that by 1989, Texaco basically had no involvement in TexPet whatsoever, and it was all Petro Ecuador. In 1998, Texaco signed an agreement that it would spend, and did spend, and it proved that it spent $40 million cleaning up the environmental damage that it was responsible for. It's a lot of money. The rest was left to Petro Ecuador. So Chevron which purchased Texaco in 2005, essentially inherited Texaco's problem that was created by Donziger. Now, Texaco never had assets in Ecuador. And before you say, well, wait a minute, didn't you just say that they purchased Texaco? Yeah, but by the time they did, Texaco was out of Ecuador. Ecuador controlled the oil fields that were once ran by the Texpet consortium. And on a number of occasions was responsible, Ecuador, for hundreds of thousands of gallons of oils spilled in the Amazon region. Fact. But what they would do, as recently as, one example, 2011, when I believe 113,000 gallons were spilled, they blamed it on Chevron. Chevron was never there. So, while that was going on, Donziger had convinced many indigenous people to sign a document that gave the go-ahead for his lawsuit actions. Now get this, the indigenous people were so poorly educated, they had no understanding, zero understanding of what they were signing. They too were bribed and cajoled into putting their signature on something, and they had no idea what the consequences were going to be. They could have signed their life away, and technically they did, and were saved from it without even knowing it. That's how bad the situation was. Oh, and then the consultants that were hired by Donziger told them to falsify data, to make it look like, yeah, there had been pollution there caused by Chevron going back years. So you may have heard about all of these stories about how, oh, this has lasted for years and there was never any cleanup done by Texaco. And look, all of the damage that was found was determined to have been caused not by anything Texaco did, let alone Chevron, which was never there, but by Ecuador itself, the government of Ecuador. And when Rafael Correa was president, he tried to cover up his real intentions with what I call this political head fake move. This is what he did. He said, hey, this is the Yatuni Peninsula. It's 4 million acres. I'll let you drill oil there if you pay me. I'm not kidding you. He says, but you know what? If you're not paying me, it's environmentally sensitive. I can't let you drill there. What? I'm not kidding you, okay? This is the kind of scheme that Donziger had enacted, and with the help of the now former president of Ecuador. He had cozied up to Rafael Correa, because I kept saying all during this, why don't you file suit against Ecuador? Crickets. Nothing. Crickets. Wow. Wow. I personally went through all kinds of stuff with this because, for example, I proved way back in 2009 that Ecuador was party to the Donziger lawsuit, and that its attorney general then, Mr. Penzance, had said that if they win the judgment, that they would then take that money and use it for purposes other than going to the indigenous people. Okay. It was really interesting. Quite interesting. And that alone fit with the overall problem of how Ecuador doesn't take care of its own poor, which is a whole other story, much larger than this large story. But all that to say this, right now Donziger is under house arrest. And if I know anything about Steve, he will not just sit there and stew. He'll figure out some kind of way to clear his name and continue his case. I hope he just simply drops the whole thing and admits that he was wrong and really come clean with why he really did what he spent a long time trying to do, which was extort Chevron. He didn't need to do that. Subscribe to Zenny62 on YouTube.